Hello everyone, I'm your host Tom McDonald with the CIO Executive Council, and welcome to this edition of the Power Hour Virtual Series. Today we're pleased to present the potentials and pitfalls of emerging technology. We've got an all-star panel lined up, and we'll explore the latest technology solutions and trends, as well as the challenges of maintaining operational, scalable, and flexible IT systems, and even a culture that can incorporate these potentially game-changing technologies, and we'll even talk some specific technologies. So as everyone settles in, we just have a couple of quick housekeeping items to go over. Please note that the session is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants afterwards. Also, we welcome and encourage your questions and comments. We want this to be interactive, and we'll do our best to get your questions answered in the time we have. You can engage with our guests by simply entering your question or comment in the chat box at the side of the screen, and please feel free to type those in as we go, and if we see something that we want to hit on, we will. We have a special time slot saved for the questions, but if we see something on the fly, we'll try to answer that as well. So you'll want to be sure to do that. And before I get started, to start some interaction, I have a poll that I wanted to bring up and kind of gauge the audience. And the question is, do you presently have a formal program or internal team dedicated to watching for and evaluating emerging technology solutions and products? And you have a yes, no, or planning to at some point. And while you do that, I'll tell you a little bit about the council itself. I see a lot of council members have registered and are logged in, but I also want to welcome those who are not members that are joining us today. The council has an 11-year history of helping IT leaders in their personal, professional, and organizational development. You can learn more and find out how to join at council.cio.com. So while I look at the results here, I'm about ready to introduce our guests, but I'll stop the poll here for a minute. And basically 70% of the folks on the line do have a formal team dedicated to watching for these emerging technologies, and 30% don't. So I think this will be a good opportunity to learn how others are doing it and also see what you can do to get your own started. So I'll take the poll down now and introduce our guests. So I'm pleased to introduce, and I'll start off with Christopher Bailey, Director of Innovation and Architecture at Matson Navigation. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you so much.
Great to have you. I also want to welcome Jim Costello, Director E-Business and Emerging Tech for Scott's Miracle-Gro Company. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Tom.
And lastly, I want to welcome David Tenenhouse, Chief Research Officer at VMware. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got our panelists, and we'll get kicked off with a little get-to-know-you moment from each one of them. So I'll start with you, Chris. Give us a little background about yourself. Tell us a little about you, your company, and your role.
Sure, sounds great. Thank you so much for having me today. Matson is a 135-year-old shipping company. We serve the Pacific. When I say shipping company, think ocean, think vessels and containers. That's the kind of shipping we do. We're headquartered in Honolulu, Hawaii. We reach all the way from the west coast to Asia, all the islands in between. We hit the South Pacific, and we also reach to Alaska now. Hawaii is really our bread and butter trade, and we are what's called the Jones Act shipper, which really what that means is that our vessels are constructed in U.S. shipyards. They're built with U.S. steel. They're U.S. flagged, and they're U.S. crewed. That is obviously more expensive, but doing that gives us the privilege to call 2 domestic ports in a row. As you can imagine, not a lot of companies do that, and so that ends up giving us 70% of the market share, or nearly 70% of the market share in Hawaii, and nearly 50% of the market share in Alaska. So kind of an interesting setup there. When we call on China, we demand a premium rate, and that is because our ships are smaller. And the advantage there is that it gives you, the customer, access to your cargo much faster. Usually they measure getting their cargo from us in hours versus days, or even weeks for some of the mega ships. Matson is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. MATX is their ticker symbol. One thing we're proud of is our IT spend as a percentage of revenue is what I would call close to best in the industry. That's because we spend the least on keeping the lights on, or the non-discretionary funds, and the most on innovation or discretionary funds. So that really helps us move our innovation projects forward. Over the past dozen years or so, we've blazed down a roadmap to replace all of our legacy tech, and we've built up a modern web-based architecture which allowed us to move all into the public cloud last year. So that's Matson. I've been part of their journey for the past 10 or 12 years. I helped forge the path to the distributed web stack that enabled us to shut down the mainframe and other legacy systems. Like I said, that all culminated in a migration to the public cloud. And now I work on cultivating a culture of innovation, making the innovation cycle both repeatable and faster, enabling creativity and agility, and then taking what we learn in this innovation cycle and injecting that back into our DNA in the form of architecture. So to sum it all up, I really own the intersection of the innovation process and architecture at Matson.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Christopher. And Jim, I'm going to go with you next. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and your role there, that'd be great.
Thanks. Work for Scotts Miracle-Gro. We're the global leader on branded consumer lawn and gardens products. We're also currently heavily investing in the hydroponic space. Our total sales are around $3 billion a year. We like to say that we help things grow and we kill things. Helping things grow, we've got Scotts and Miracle-Gro, and then killing things, we've got Ortho, Roundup, Tomcat, really focusing on pest control, weed control, whereas we're helping plants and lawns grow on the other side of things. We also just recently acquired PlantLink and Blossom, so as an organization, we're now venturing into some of the smart devices spaces, and we're excited where that's going to take us with our Connected Yard and Grow app and pulling those things together. And just a great time to be in this business. Myself, I've got 8 years in software. First couple of those were consulting, followed up by product management. Then I moved into industries. I came to Scotts, went into a retailer, went to a financial institution, and now I'm back at Scotts. I've been here now for 6 years on my second tour of duty. Started as a director of the global process team where we were doing the large projects that span things across our globe. Over time, I've added e-business to that. Then I've created sales support and emerging technologies, and both of those are really doing a lot of custom building of applications, attacking very specific problems for Scotts. That's pretty much me.
Excellent. I know, Jim, too, in our pre-call information, we were talking a little bit about all the great opportunities in emerging tech for a company like Scotts. So I'm sure you got a lot of interesting things to share along those lines. Seems like a type of business that lends itself well to that.
Absolutely. Can't wait to get into some of that.
All right. And then next we have David Tenenhouse, Chief Research Officer of VMware. David, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, your role?
Sure. Speaking about the company first, VMware is the leader in infrastructure virtualization, pretty much, anything to do with data center orchestration, management, et cetera. I guess, almost that keep the lights on part is how we got going and how we got started, which was, virtualizing compute, which has really enabled people to do a tremendous amount of storage consolidation, server consolidation initially, and then we've been virtualizing networks and storage more recently. So all of that allowing people to build what we now refer to as the software-defined data center. And then most recently as a company, we've been expanding that into hybrid computing where you can combine public and private cloud, and recently announced our VMware Cloud Foundation offering that allows you to basically run the same environment in your public cloud at, say, Amazon or IBM as you run in a private cloud. That's the sort of most kind of obvious part of the company. Some of the really exciting newer parts of the company are, for example, our work on network virtualization and our NSX product that really, allows people to essentially establish virtual networks between all of their virtual machines everywhere. That includes virtual machines running our hypervisor, but also VMs running other people's hypervisors. And in doing that, you're able to now, basically partition off traffic that's sort of operating between certain apps from traffic that's running with other apps. That has huge microsegmentation and security benefits. So it's not just operational benefits, but also the security benefits that say if one part of your data center, be it public or private, gets compromised, can you isolate that from moving laterally through everything else? So that's kind of the security front. Another part that people aren't as aware of is our AirWatch, which was acquisition we made, I guess, almost 3 years ago, which is the leader in mobile device management. So as people bring their devices to work, those consumer devices become enterprise devices, and we're helping people secure and manage those devices and the information on them. Taking that further, as Internet of Things evolves, we're looking to essentially provide similar benefits to our customers for IoT. So that's kind of hopefully a quick introduction both to VMware traditionally and the newer parts of the company. In terms of me and my organization, I'm leading a research and innovation-focused organization. We've been looking a lot lately at what I refer to as computing for the 99%. Something we kind of realized is that folks like Google and Facebook have a small number of problems like the social network graph or search indexing that they need to solve at a totally enormous scale. The vast bulk of companies want to run big data at a larger scale than they do today, but it's nowhere near the Google scale. And they actually have a wider range of problems. So we've been sort of really digging in and looking to say, what do our customers need going forward to allow them to do the things they want to do, but without sort of getting dragged along essentially to have to buy the moral equivalent of supercomputing to be able to do that. In terms of myself personally, I'm really a networking and systems researcher by training, so coming over to VMware was like coming home to me. But along the way, I kind of got broader in terms of things like having a joint appointment with the Sloan School when I was at MIT, so that got me into strategy. I was then went on to DARPA, ran their information technology programs, and had really expected to come back to MIT, but ended up making the transition into industry, and have been either leading research and innovation or at one point I was CEO of an Amazon subsidiary, A9.com, for a while, so really learned about software as a service through that, and spent time as a VC getting a look at that side of the innovation space.
Excellent. Well, I think we've built our panel's street cred here. So with that, I think we can move to our next piece where we're going to ask each about their approach, perspective, and any specifics that they have around emerging tech. So Jim, I wanted to start with you this time. And could you tell us a little bit about your approach, your organization's efforts in the emerging tech space?
Sure. We kicked off the beginning of 2013. And really the CIO at the time and I sat down and we crafted out a vision that basically said the emerging tech team, we wanted to drive the monetization of emerging technologies, which left it really wide open for me to go really define how we're going to attack this and what we're going to do. We wanted to get a couple of small wins early to get some people excited. One of the first things we did was we created a smart mousetrap that we took a Tomcat mousetrap that's a live catch. And when that would close, it had an iBeacon that would trigger an app on your smartphone that would tell you it caught one. Showed that around, got some people thinking, hey, that's really neat. There were some problems with it at the time because at the time we were using iBeacons and they were 3 for $99. I think the mousetrap itself was maybe $12. So adding $33 to that product wasn't going to be a viable solution, but it really got people thinking, hey, we need to be able to start putting our products in the way that the consumer is really going to want to start using them. As part of that, it started to generate some business interest, and we really broke our team into groups around how do we help the consumer, how do we help our customers, our Lowe's, Depots, Walmarts, Aces, and then how do we help Scotts. As we were going through that, one of the things that ended up happening is we had to develop a software for our Salesforce. We needed a Salesforce execution tool. We had some very specific requirements, and we used one of the people in the emerging technology team to build out that software. So then we added a fourth opportunity, which was, is that something that also may be a B2B where we could resell that? We had just rolled out Google Apps for the enterprise, so we built that on Google App Engine. So in essence, it was a free build for us other than the internal labor. Other things that we did in the beginning, we were really looking at moonshots when we first started. So we were looking at things like, I'm not sure if anybody's ever heard of a photonic fence, but it was a laser system that had the ability to understand and identify mosquitoes, and female mosquitoes specifically because they have a different wing beat, and it would zap them. So you could really target female mosquitoes to really reduce the population. As you start thinking about that, it would, in terms of trying to put that in someone's yard, didn't seem to be very viable. After about a year, we transitioned from looking at those moonshots to really started looking at more applied technologies. So how can we take things that are still cutting edge but drive business value? And that's when we really started focusing on things like augmented reality. We brought in some mobile printers for us, and I'll get into those two examples real quickly. But the augmented reality one, we had a business partner that we were trying to sell into to secure some temporary merchandising space with them. And we ended up my team created a digital display unit. Display unit is something that would drop in the middle of the store where they have temporary merchandising space. And we ended up using augmented reality to show them exactly what this non-realistic display unit would look like if we actually built it and put it in their store. So we went to a local store, put down the tracker, put the thing on it, showed that into a top-to-top meeting with them. They ended up taking that in 3,500 stores across the country and replenished it throughout the season. So that was a really big win for us there. In terms of looking at more the mobile printer I was talking about, one of our big problems that we had is we have grass seed. And grass seed has a label on it that tells you how long that seed is good for. And that process to check the grass seed, we would have sales managers in the field go to every store, check the grass seed, see what the label is. If it was expired, they'd have to move it out of the merchandising space, jot it down, send it back, see if you could relabel that grass seed, wait to hear back. Then they would mail the new labels. They'd go back to the store, put the labels on. What we're able to do with them is they now can go to the stores, scan the UPC. It will tell them what batch it's from and if it's still viable, and they can print right there what that new label is going to be. So a huge efficiency gain. And in Kentucky, the seed inspector actually saw one of our sales managers was talking to him about it, and it got to the point where he even said, hey, if you guys have any expired seed, I'm not going to fine you. I'm just going to call you, and you can come over and fix it. So another really big win for us there. Over time, we've really focused a lot on our sales team, because going back to monetizing, how do we help them spend more time educating the consumer in the stores and less time doing the stuff that we can help automate. But we've also worked with our R&D group. We've worked with our supply chain group. We're doing an IoT demo here in the next month where we're going to be putting some sensors in our mulch compost beds to measure moisture and temperature, and those are things that you have to do on a daily basis for regulatory reasons. It'll help them save from a labor perspective, but more importantly, it will significantly reduce our ability or our risk of having those things catch fire, which they can do, and we had a pretty big one here about 3 months ago. So a lot of things from the technology space that we've been able to bring to bear to the business to really help drive some value. And that's really what we've been trying to sell internally is how do we drive value for you? It's interesting over time to see how it started out as we would come up with some ideas, and then we would try to pull in business people to see how those ideas could help solve their problems. Now we have people coming to us from the business saying, hey, this is what one of my problems is. Is there technology out there that can help me with this? So we've got, internally we call them our scouts. We still have our scouts looking at the new technologies. Tom, you brought up blockchain earlier. That's something we have on our radar. We haven't done a whole lot of looking into that yet, but we do have a pipeline. Once we vet something and internally we think there's a good play for it, we'll pitch it to our business sponsors. We really don't go to the prototype phase anymore without a business sponsor there with us. And I think right now, one of the things talked about here is pitfalls. One of the biggest things we're looking at now is, as we create all of these things, how do we put a structure in place to continually maintain them without significantly growing headcount? So that's one of the key challenges that we're facing right now. But it's been a great journey, and really if you haven't gotten started, I say get started and just correct as you go.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Jim. And I love the augmented reality story with the display items, but I really think I need the photonic mosquito fence, and I want to know when that's available. So.
I got to tell you, those things destroyed me. So when I heard that, I was really, really pushing for us to do something around that.
All right, excellent. Well, David, I'm going to come to you next, and want to ask you to tell us a little bit about your approach and your perspective around emerging tech.
To get off of the mute there.
There you go.
Well, I guess a couple different things, and there's kind of both places I'd say where our experience is the experience is probably similar to Jim. Some of the reactions, and adjustments might have been a little bit different, but at a high level, first off, within the company, and this is just my vocabulary. It's not the way we telegraph it out, but I think we have sort of shotgun-style innovation programs, and we have rifle shots. And by shotgun style, I mean we have programs that encourage large numbers of our engineers to be kind of innovative on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. Right, so always, thinking, and these are the sorts of things that end up reflected in new features, new opportunities. So that's like in-house code-a-thons. We have a kind of very competitive R&D innovation offsite where, that brings together a large chunk of our team and gives people a chance to swap ideas and things like that. So there's numerous programs to try to encourage everybody to be doing a little bit more innovation. And then, kind of more in my department, we have a small number of projects that are very targeted. They involve small numbers of people. Resources are limited. So I think of those as the rifle shots. In that category, where you'd asked us about avoiding pitfalls, I've kind of got a set of rules I use. Some of these evolved from, there was a former DARPA director. He was actually kind of an inventor of the LCD. So, he was a great innovator himself, and former DARPA director George Hallmeyer had a set of questions. I've morphed them, but it's things like, first off, do we have a real clear, can we really crisply, without jargon, describe what we're trying to do? A question I added to George's list is the timing right? It's interesting. Jim described like the mousetrap, but it was a right idea, and it actually was probably successful in getting people's attention focused on IoT. However, the timing, given where the technology curve was, meant it was going to be too expensive at that point in time, but it'll be right priced at another point. So my experience is we're actually way more often too early than we are too late, right? So you want to avoid being too early. You don't want to be late, but you got to, if you're too early, you go kind of build it out, the customers aren't there, or it's too expensive right now, and then later when it's the right time, everybody remembers that it didn't work or it wasn't, financially the right thing. They don't remember, So the next question that George always had is, why will it work this time? And the disillusionment in that is, I thought this was a great new idea, and if you ask why will it work this time, you're basically saying somebody has thought about it before. Great thing about the internet world, any idea we're going to talk about, others have tried it, and there are probably others right now that are on the job. So really understanding why it hasn't worked in the past, because I trust people's intuitions. If they want to go try something now, they're probably right, but I need to get them to go do their homework and really understand what's changed in the external ecosystem, or what new complementary innovation, what's happened out there that means it's going to work now. I've got more of a list here, but I'll just lastly touch on one that Jim brought up, which is what's your exit strategy, right? Which is how are you going to avoid, as an innovation team, supporting this thing forever into the future? You've got to have sort of fairly early on some plan for that. I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thanks so much, David. And I'm just putting a poll up on our screen now. Hope that's not why you stopped. I just wanted to give everybody a chance to take a look at it. So I've got another poll here before we get to the second segment of today's show. And I just wanted the audience to take a look at this and let us know. You can check up to 3, I believe. Some of the, yes, 3, I'm getting the nod, yes. Which emerging tech areas are of most interest to your IT department and business objectives today? And check off any and all that apply up to 3, and then we'll kind of look at some of the top candidates here, top topics. And while we wait for that, Dave, why don't we come around back to you, and I wanted to ask you a question if I could. And we talked a little pre-call about some specifics and talked a little bit about blockchain, and I was curious if that's something you might want to elaborate on. That's a specific technology. Is that something that's on the horizon for you, something you guys are looking into now? What's your thoughts on blockchain?
Yeah, great question. It very much is something we're looking at. And that's an example where it's not, if you think about it, we're more in the infrastructure business. However, we sell to all the financial players, right? So, one of the things I often look at is, do we have a market adjacency? Well, the answer is here, yes. We have sales channels. If we had a great product that was related to blockchain, we could do something with it. So, that's a good, check box ticked. Then we looked at kind of the existing Bitcoin blockchain. So like others, we got very excited about really what the blockchain is a distributed ledger that allows a kind of group of folks that are in different companies or different administrative domains to be able to jointly maintain a ledger, right? And that's really exciting. It has huge opportunities to improve efficiency, not just in financial transactions, but say title recording, deeds, properties, you name it, right? Anything of that sort where you'd like to have a shared record. So we think that's very exciting, but when we looked at the property of the Bitcoin blockchain, what we realized is, the Bitcoin folks had a particular kind of slant on what they wanted to achieve for a digital currency. They wanted it to be anonymous, like, kind of like cash. So they wanted the participants to be anonymous, but the transactions to actually be very transparent and visible. When we look at what we think kind of real people need in the financial, again, we look at the enterprise players, that 99% of enterprises, we actually think they need a different set of properties. For example, you want to know if you're doing business who your counterparties are so you can manage counterparty risk. So, we're looking at and prototyping a blockchain that's kind of flipped. It says, okay, let's assume that the participants are a club, what we call a permissioned system, as opposed to permissionless. And so there's a way to understand who your counterparties are. On the other hand, by the way, you may want to keep your trading strategy a secret. So it's really, very different set of properties. We also looked at the Bitcoin blockchain. It turns out it's not good for high throughput. It has a very limited throughput. And strangely enough, it's kind of not environmentally friendly. It has a very high energy requirement because of the way they do it. So we're basically looking, saying, here's a different set of properties. We're working on building a prototype, and then we'll be looking to engage customers as quickly as we can. Not, to say, here's a product, but to say, let's do some trials. Let's understand, your needs around this so we can fine-tune our assumptions about the properties. I want to pass the baton back, but just lets me, one of the things I missed is we always, as quickly as we can, try to get a prototype into the hands of, users or customers and get a feedback loop going. Not assume that we know what people need. Try and, hope that we got it going in the right general direction, but as soon as you can get something into a customer's hands and get them generating feedback as to what the next priorities are, the better the chances are.
Excellent. Thanks, David. Christopher, I'd like to ask you the same thing. Is there anything that you have a take on in terms of blockchain?
Yeah, it makes good sense for us. We're part of a supply chain, so it really fits in well as you move your cargo from point A to point B. It's not always from one ocean port to the next. So we're just a piece of that. And so as you look at the wider spectrum of the supply chain and we fit in just a portion, blockchain is a good way to looks like a good way to help us, spread out those financials. So we're definitely taking a look at it. We haven't done anything yet. The shipping industry tends to be a little bit conservative and laggard, but we're definitely watching it. We think it could make a huge difference. But again, not just with financials. Also, we have something called hazardous materials declarations, which the person who's shipping the cargo has to generate and create a report and tell all of the people along the supply chain exactly what it is they're shipping so that, things don't blow up or spill. And that information has to pass from each shipper to each shipper along the way, along the entire supply chain. And so for that to pass through a blockchain would be very efficient. So we're definitely taking a look at that. And then a third example would be the customs manifest that has to go, again, all along the supply chain, but eventually to the governments as well. So 3 different use cases we see for blockchain that we're watching.
Excellent. Jim, I'm going to come back around to you, and we've got some results from the survey here, and I'll just call it out to you a little bit and see if you had any opinion on that, Jim. So we talked a little bit, Jim, I think offline about artificial intelligence, and you're curious about how that can help make money for the organization or save money for the organization. 18% of our respondents has that as one of the most interest areas for their IT department or business objectives. And then also the leader of the pack by far, though, is customer-facing engagement applications at 82% almost. Did you want to speak to either of those, either customer-facing or both, and your thoughts on AI?
AI is definitely one we have on our radar. We're interested in it. We're looking at it in terms of both how can it help us understand the consumer better, to be able to come up with better products, market to them better, but also at the same time look at things like our supply chain, our forecasting methodologies. How can it help in those sort of concepts? That's where we've been focused on it to date, but we haven't made a ton of progress on the AI stuff yet. The consumer-facing things, I'm a big proponent of those. Like I said, we just purchased 2 companies that have consumer-facing apps, and it could tie with the AI right there if you think about it. If you've got, if anybody's familiar with AeroGrow, I believe AeroGrow has just recently made their AeroGarden a smart device. And if you had some AI attached to that, instead of telling the consumer, hey, your nutrients are getting low, the AI could understand they're getting low, and ideally if there was a way to then pump that back into the AeroGarden to continue that growth, continue the nutrients when need be, or if you have it somewhere where there's a lot of sun, it may say, hey, let me turn the lights off for a little bit because I've noticed that it's got enough. So there's some combinations there as well. But I do believe the consumer is going to be wanting to do more and more with the smart devices, and ultimately I think the key there is going to be security in that space. I know I'm not a big fan of putting on any of the Nest type products right now, just because I'm been grilled to be paranoid from the people I work with here. But I do believe that's coming, and that will be something that's solved quickly, and that's something we are constantly keeping our eye on. How can we help our consumers grow better plants, get better yields from what they're doing based off of device feeding information back to us and us helping them with that.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so I'm going to go around to David next, and I'm going to actually go around the horn. I'll go to you first. Christopher. I'll go to Christopher first, then David, then Jim. Where do companies start in exploring emerging technologies? We've got 30% of the folks who haven't really started yet, and then 70% who have. How do they stay current? So where do they start, and how do they stay current to you, Christopher?
Sure, sounds good. So the first thing I would say is create an innovation center. Or you could call it a Mode 2 center. I've also heard the sad, awesome mode. I don't like that myself. But basically, you want to separate some people or some group that does innovation, because to get started, if we all own it, then nobody owns it, kind of a deal. So you got to build it into the culture. You got to break off a small group and get them started. And then hopefully, once it's running, things are working a few years down the road, maybe that group has worked themselves out of a job, because innovation is such a part of the DNA. But to get started, you need that innovation center. Once you have that group up and running, one of the things that they need to do is ideation or idea generation. Go around, reach all corners of the organization, try to find ideas, turn around, do some triage, do some tracking, and a lot of experimentation. The visual that I like to use here is a funnel. At the thick end of the funnel, all kinds of ideas coming in, lots and lots of ideas coming in frequently. And you need to quickly learn how to turn away bad ideas or ideas that just aren't going to work. Maybe the timing's not right, etc. So the funnel gets thinner and thinner and thinner till the very end where you have some ideas that you actually want to put some real dollars into piloting and get customer feedback and that kind of stuff. So that's the picture in my mind that we use all the time as a funnel. We actually use a software as a service provider to help us with our idea tracking. It works out really good. We have workshops, brainstorming activities that we run with our different business partners, and no idea is a bad idea. We take them all in, and then we quickly go through them, triage them, and get to that thinner end of the funnel. So another thing I'll point out on getting started is go to some conferences that may be out of your normal set that you would go to. A few that I found useful recently are South by Southwest. It sounds like a music and film conference, but it's not. There's an interactive piece of this, and the interactive piece is really technology. What I found there was a heavy focus on the customer experience and a heavy focus on design. That really helped us think about how to get some of our innovative ideas into the customer's hands in a way they would accept it. So that was very useful to go to some of these not strictly technology conferences.
That's some great tangible advice, Christopher. Thank you so much for that. David, I'd like to ask you the same question. So we're going around the horn, and Jim, I'll come to you next. So where do companies start, and how do they stay current?
Well, I think on the starting, if you're kind of starting a new one of these organizations, that you just heard kind of some of the things I'd agree with, so I just won't repeat them. And then, one comment I'd make, and I think it relates to something Jim said, is you probably need to almost bifurcate and find a few things that can give you some near-term wins that'll be, perhaps smaller but usable by your product teams fairly soon. And then, meanwhile, get some longer-term moonshots going, and that fits with that's where you're going to recruit the new people to go do those. The reason I look at this kind of combo is that ultimately the strategic value of having one of these sort of innovation teams is to create whole new businesses and create a future for the company, right? Because you know that the old franchises will, over time, right, they're going to kind of lose their ability to extract rent. So you've got to be thinking about what are going to be the new franchises of the future. The catch is that the people that are building those also have to develop relationships and credibility with the product teams. Or, they'll show up with the great new thing, but nobody's going to really trust them to deliver. So I've really, one of the biggest surprises to me in this whole business has been how important it is for your innovation people to accumulate kind of in the bank trust from having delivered some incremental things to the product teams, so that then when they come with something big, the product teams will say, yeah, I trust them. I know they'll be there for me. They won't just run off to do the next thing, right, and hoof this over the fence, right? When I run into trouble shipping this, they'll be there to help. So that's, I think, important to doing this. In terms of also sourcing new ideas, some of the conferences mentioned are good. The other place that we heavily engage with are the leading universities. Particularly in the U.S., the place Berkeley, Stanford, MIT, CMU, it's kind of an obvious set. These folks have been, at least in our business, repeatedly highly influential. And it's not so much the work at the universities, it's that anybody with a good idea that is, say, at another company and not at the universities probably goes and gives a talk at the universities. So if you pay attention to kind of the presenters and the idea flow there, there's, you have a good chance to tap onto everybody's idea flow, not just, say, Berkeley's or MIT's. Now, if you're particularly in our business of software, then places like the open source forums are also very important. Finally, our customers and our employees. In a sister part of our organization, there's something called our CTO ambassadors. But I think of these as, our top field engineers who are working day-to-day with customers and their problems. Those folks also they're paying attention to new technologies, and they have, not every one of them, but there's a set of those folks that have phenomenal intuitions about the intersection of technology, emerging new technology, and customer need. And so I listen to them, and the final one is our employees. Our employees also look at new technologies, so it often amazes me. Like when we got work going on containers a few years ago, something that I found really interesting was the number of employees that came out of the woodwork, and it turned out they were playing with containers in their spare time and on the weekend, right? And so they had, there was a great knowledge base there. They were ahead of us.
Excellent. Well, Jim, you have the unenviable task of going third, so you may have to repeat some things. But what about your opinion? Where do companies start exploring emerging technology, and how do they stay current?
Yeah, I don't think I really have anything to add to where do companies start. I will reiterate the importance of building the relationships across the different business areas. That has been absolutely crucial for us. And then incremental to what was said in terms of staying current, one of the things we did and like to continue to do, networking. So when we were getting started, talked to some people at Hershey's about what they were doing. After we got it going a little bit, we hit a couple of local companies. L Brands is one of them, and Allied Commerce is another one, to see what they were doing. Hosted people here, showed them what they were doing, what we were doing. And those are just other ways that other people are doing the idea generation. What are they looking at? How are they looking at it? So just great ways to share with people that you feel comfortable sharing with. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that with a competitor, but great ways to help them out, get some changes for what you might want to do, and keep the ball moving forward with everything else you got going on.
Excellent. All right. So we're opening up the session to any questions that the audience might have as well. I have a few more questions specific, but I do have one here, and it's really around the pitfalls piece of the potential and pitfalls. And David, we'll start with you, then we'll go to you, Jim, and then Christopher. How do you reduce the associated risk of failure or costly mistakes? David, do you have a take on that?
Well, I hit on some of them earlier. Timing, really sitting there and saying, when is the market window? If this all works, when's the market window for it? Because strangely enough, the most common mistake is being too early for the market. And you can't always get that right, but you can be watching it. So I've had cases where actually, in working for a different employer, it must have been about 15 years ago, we had a project on robotics, and we very quickly stopped it saying, we're just too early, which was correct, right? And we didn't, we actually didn't completely stop it. We actually handed it back to the universities and said, we need you folks to go work on this for a while. So we open sourced the software, et cetera. So timing, really important. The avoiding pitfalls, the why it will work this time. Learn from the past so you can really focus your efforts on the thing that's changed, the thing that's really the new part that's different. Don't make the mistake of thinking somebody hasn't tried this before. And really, it's sometimes kind of painful to get people to carefully understand what they're doing that's different. I think there's also just matching your risk management to the style of project. So, for example, if you're doing a project that's in one of our mainstream franchises that customers are just totally dependent on, et cetera, we have to have sort of a fairly rigorous risk management on that. The whole brand's being put at risk, right? If you're doing a project that's in a new area, like let's say where our IoT work was a couple years ago, then it's about running quickly and getting feedback from the customers as quickly as possible. Now that we're starting to look to turn that into product and service, we need to kick in with a different risk management. So tune the risk management to, how, close and far is this from, mission critical to customers at this point in time. And the last thing I'll say is getting that, get a prototype quickly, get it into the hands of people, and get a feedback loop going so that you don't work on the wrong things, right? Because usually your team has a view of, here's the 5 next priorities. It's usually not the right list. The customers will come back and tell you that, you're missing something, that if you don't do it, the whole thing's not going to be worth having.
Excellent. I can imagine the question of why will it work this time has got to be soul crushing for someone who didn't realize that somebody might have tried this already.
That's kind of a difference. I'll say I love, I mentioned George Hellmeyer. George was a great mentor to me, but George didn't really worry too much about people's feelings on that one. I have worked a lot to try to soften the hit of that question.
Excellent. All right, Jim, did you have anything to add about, I know we've touched on it a little bit, was there anything else you might want to add to how to avoid any kind of costly failures?
Yeah, I would say definitely engage your business partners. Whatever area you're impacting, make sure there's a champion in that space for the things you're trying to do. The prototype, as Chris said, those two are absolutely critical. And then when you're actually going through the projects, what we try to do to the extent that we can, sometimes there's things that you can't, but focus on the largest obstacles first. And if you can't get by the largest obstacle, drop it. Don't be afraid to come back to it later, but to the extent that you can, focus there, get it done. Okay, then what's the next one? And then as you'll see, the challenges become smaller and smaller, your success rate increases.
Excellent, great advice. And Christopher, did you have any avoiding the pitfalls advice?
Yeah, sure. So just building on what was just said, really, the first thing you want to focus on is experimenting, and the goal here is to learn fast. And one thing I found interesting that I learned going through this journey is that when you're staffing your innovation center, you do not want builders. You really want experimenters. And the difference is the experimenter is somebody who says, oh, that was really cool, what's next? And the builder is the guy who wants to, make it bulletproof and 100% ready for production, go live, rollout, that kind of stuff. That's a different mindset. And so really trying to find those experimenters, the guys that really like to test and play with things and learn fast, is really how you can get going quickly and learn fast. And then we also use A/B testing when appropriate. So, try to get a new feature or something and get that feedback loop going quickly. A/B testing is a quick way to do that. You can roll a new feature out to just a select subset of people and track its usage. Those are a couple ideas.
All right. So I'm going to move on to another question, and I got 2 of them really, and we'll start with basically and I'll start with you, Jim. What are the technologies that right now that you think companies should possibly invest in? And then at the second round of this question, that would be the first piece. The second round will kind of go around to anything on the horizon. So we'll kind of cover some specific technologies and solutions at this point, and name names if we can. But Jim, so we'll start with you. What technologies, is there anything out there right now that you feel is pretty solid that companies might want to look at and invest in?
I'll cop out a little bit with the answer of it depends on the company's needs. The example I have with that is right now there are a lot of public cloud providers that are offering platform as a service, applications as a service, to where you can really build up a lot of custom internal solutions for your business, if that makes sense. We don't like to customize things if we don't have to, but unfortunately in certain instances we definitely have to do that. So if you're not looking at things like Google App Engine or IBM's Cloud Ant, then I would recommend having an internal team kind of look at those things to say, are there custom things that we need to deliver to our business that can drive significant value? And if so, let's start building out a team. A little bit of a cop-out because it depends. But as I mentioned earlier, IoT, I think, is huge and will just continue to grow. Augmented reality, we've already proven significant value with that, and I think there's going to be a lot more. And tied right to that, as I mentioned earlier, try to avoid look at the biggest challenges. We're looking at VR, We haven't found a good applicable business problem for it to solve. The technology's there, but we haven't found a way to use it yet. So those are some examples.
Excellent. All right. Terrific. Christopher, I wanted to ask you the same question. There are some technologies that you see are pretty fleshed out and something that you think that companies might want to be taking a look at right now?
Sure. I would definitely echo the sentiment that, going all in at a public cloud will be beneficial for a lot of people, mostly because if you are not an infrastructure company, why are you spending so much time trying to host the infrastructure and data center? And so for us at Matson, it made a lot of sense, and we did do that, go all in at a public cloud. And that was huge. It freed us up to really go on offense. We also have been spending a bunch of time looking at data scientists. So far we've started with an intern from a local university, and he's been helping us analyze some really hairy problems, and it's been very helpful. I second the vote for IoT. There was a lot of interesting things that came out of CES this year, so a lot of new sensors that were portrayed as useful in like self-driving cars, but could we turn those around and make them useful in self-driving trucks or self-driving ships even? We've actually spent quite a bit of time looking at drones because drones with cameras can really help us with our tracking within our terminal area. And then OCR, while it's not new technology or emerging, it really has made some strides recently, and so the optical character recognition, we're finding new ways to use that that's turning out to be very helpful.
Excellent, great. David, I'd like to give you the final thought on any current or new technologies that companies might want to look at right now.
Well, of course, I've got to say you got to look at all of our new stuff, right? But if I, so look at our cloud foundation and this and that. But I'd say some of the things, network virtualization, particularly as you go, whether it's all public or it's all private, or particularly if it's hybrid, public-private cloud, you're going to still need to have a way to tie your stuff together and coordinate off from everybody else's stuff, right? And that's a way bigger problem if you're going public cloud. So we think that's a pretty important one from kind of policy, security, for many companies, regulatory compliance, et cetera. Getting a little less in our core space. I think the data science question that kind of comment that came up is an important one. And whether it's data scientists or other domain, you've got to have a way of empowering your domain experts, either by complementing them with data sciences or with tools, so that they can kind of quickly look at your data. So you need to be able to kind of visualize the data to even figure out, is there enough signal in here, or is it all noise? And what kind of signals, so then I can figure out what type of AI or machine learning application I want to go build. So, if you want to go do big data stuff, that first step we're finding is actually pretty hard. We're seeing this even with our own data, right, that, we collect on our own products, et cetera, just, that initial figuring it out. So that, I think, is going to be an important space. As you build on that, this isn't sort of a go buy it this year category. It's just something to keep in mind. There's a lot of fascination, say, with deep neural networks as, one machine learning thing. I would sort of sound a note of caution there, for a couple reasons, one of which is, in general, they don't come with an explanation as to why they got the conclusions they did. But also they work particularly well when you have really humongous amounts of data, like YouTube scale amounts of data. So we're looking to understand what in the industry is called, or in the research space is called, explainable AI or explainable machine learning, so that you understand why you got the answers you did. I don't have that, you can't go buy that yet, but that's something to be looking for. We talked about blockchain. IoT, this is a space that I've been in. You talk about being too early. I started driving this when I was in DARPA around 97. That wasn't too early for the military, but it sure was way too early for everyone else. what I think is really exciting, if you generalize it, it's all about the boundary between the physical and virtual world. So if you're a company transacting, at all in the physical world, which is the vast bulk of our customers, then, IoT, and by the way, AR is also all about that boundary, between the physical and virtual world. Very exciting. I think the thing to be looking at is, how am I going to get from these field trials to production, right? So, I mean, most folks have done some field trials and gotten some good results. But now if they start thinking about what happens when I scale that up to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of things, and let's say, hundreds or thousands of IoT gateways. So we've been really looking at how do we operationalize IoT gateways, help our customers do that. So I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you so much. And that brings us up to pretty much the end of the session. So what I want to do now is go around first to Christopher, then David, and then finally you, Jim, and kind of have you give us kind of your final thought, your final word for, more than one word though, for today's session that we can have our attendees leave with. So Christopher, if you want to kick us off, then we'll go to you, David, and then to you, Jim.
Sure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Matson was able to shut down all of its legacy systems, get rid of all of its technical debt, and move to the promise of a public cloud. In my mind, being able to do that at Matson makes it doable for most places, and that doesn't just translate to going to public cloud, but for all types of emerging tech. So it is possible. Anything that gives you that kind of tickle that the cloud gave Matson, it can be done. I said earlier, start with an innovation center, staff it with experimenters, not builders. Really invest a lot in your design and your customer experience. Use your innovation team to run some workshops and get the ideation work going. And then do quick, fast experiments and learn as quick as you can. You're really looking for these ideas that translate into meaningful business value. And then that's where you can shift your focus and start paying close attention to design and specifically the entire customer experience. And then the last thing I wanted to say is to be cautious when you start up an innovation team. You want to work to get buy-in across your entire senior management, and you want to pay close attention to the problem of the haves versus the have-nots. So you're going to have to, the person leading the innovation team is going to have to spend a lot of time building up good relationships with the rest of IT and making sure they're on board and that they know the difference between capital I innovation team and finding the lowercase I innovation throughout all corners of the organization. So the Innovation Center's goal is to make the path of innovative ideas to implementation both repeatable, agile, and accelerated. And then once you have that success rolling, it's kind of built back into the DNA of the organization and hopefully just work themselves out of a job.
All right, terrific. David, you want to give us a minute final word, final thought?
Well, I'm going to just be a bit of a broken record for those that remember what records are. I agree with many of the prior comments. Keep an eye on the timing. Is the timing going to be right for the market when I get this done? You won't know that at the beginning, but as you start knowing that, adjust the speed with which you're doing things. Don't get your investment too far ahead of the revenue. You do have to get ahead of the revenue. Just don't get too far. Understand why it'll work this time. Prototype, work with customers as quickly as you can. And get that feedback loop going. It's also that feedback from the customers is also what's going to help you convince your businesses that they need to move more quickly. And I do want to second the thoughts on running experiments and learning fast. I think also very important. But I'll stop.
Got it. Excellent. Thanks, David. And Jim, do you want to close us out with your final thought?
I'll say ditto to the two previous comments. The only thing I would add to that is one thing you might be amazed with is how much engagement, excitement, and continually challenging of the status quo you'll find with an emerging tech team. It's great to see people going down to that area just to see and talk to those guys. It really does drive excitement around the org.
All right. Thanks so much, Jim. And we're right on the top of the hour, so we nailed it. We nailed the landing, I guess is what you would say there. So up on your screen now, you see a feedback, your feedback matters. There's an eval link there that you can click on and let us know how we did, what else you might want to hear about, especially around emerging tech as we plan out the rest of the year's calendar. So you'll want to let us know how we're doing there. And we also have a webcast that is open to members, of course, and also to the public on storytelling, the IT leader's secret weapon, and that it features our special guest, Martha Heller, and is part of a chapter from her new book. And we have several guests lined up for that as well, so you want to be able to register for that. At this point, we'd like to thank our guests as well as everyone who attended today, and our producer, Lauren Costello. The link to a short questionnaire, I already covered that. All right, that concludes today's session. And thank you to all of our guests. Thank you for your time today. On behalf of the CIO Executive Council, thank you for joining us, and see you next time.
That does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.